Hi, welcome to Ask the Manager. We have Melanie Petrucci with us today. She's a town meeting member in Precinct 1. And if you've ever been on a committee, she's probably been on that committee. If she isn't on it now, she was probably on it before because you've been involved in so many facets of the town, which
True.
is really complimentary. You are secretary of the Historic District Commission at this
Correct.
time.
Correct.
And you're a member of the Town Center Association and the 300th Anniversary Committee, which is a really important committee coming up, a lot of work, and the Republican Town Committee.
Yes.
Now, you have been involved with education, the library, Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, and
League of Women
SPAC,
Voters.
League of Women Voters.
Yes. SPAC when it was SPAC.
And probably other things too, but we don't have more than an hour, so we'll get started. And
Yeah, we don't
thank
wanna
you for all
bore
that you do. And you know what else she does? She moves the question at town meeting.
does.
When she gets called on, I go, yes, she's going to move the question.
Well, some people don't like that, but
I know. You either like it or you don't. I love it.
I gauge it. I mean, I figure I'm not going to just move the question to move the question.
It's when everything's been said.
Yeah.
Again and again.
And when things get to be really repetitive. And so.
And everyone seems to appreciate that.
Not everyone.
Well.
I've been called out, but
Keep it up.
I'll just take it on the chin.
Keep it up. Why don't you start with the first question?
Okay. So, would you like me to call you Kevin or
Yes, please.
Kevin.
Of course. Yep.
So what do you see that makes Shrewsbury special, and what are the particular strengths that we can use to create better tomorrows?
Oh, that's a big
That's
question.
a great one.
There's a lot of things that I think makes Shrewsbury special. And this isn't, I'm not passing on the question. I'll get into it deeply. I think it's the who and the how. The people that are involved are truly committed to what they do. And I see that first and foremost in the select board. They're really committed to not only the form of government that we had, but really providing exceptional outcomes to residents. And that's what they challenge us to do in all the, one-on-one meetings that I have with them is really what can we do to make something better? How can we get more information out to people? How can we build a better outcome? How do we improve the recreation program or this? So the people behind the scenes from select board and then staff really drive a high level of desirability and certainty whenever they're working through the projects and processes that they do. And you don't see that. Like, I don't ever see in the town hall, oh, that's the way we've always done it. Oh, we're just, it's good enough for government work. Those aren't the tones that ring out. And that's different than many other places because some people do get complacent. They get frustrated by not having resources, and we don't have everything that we want. But the people are always positive and still driven to get to the best outcomes. And Shrewsbury just has a very high level of professionalism. So the attitude and like how we go about things, I've always noticed both before I got here and since I've been here, is just not polished in a negative or a fake way, but just really committed to providing professional outcomes, being thoughtful, making sure that we take on new technology initiatives, new approaches to how we do business, and not forgetting that we're always serving the residents. And I think those are the two things, the people and how we go about conducting our business. And I think those are two key ingredients to making sure we always get the best outcomes. I would love to always have more opportunities to engage with more residents and bring more residents into the decision-making process and have them feel heard and make them really truly feel that the time that they give and dedication makes outcomes better and has good impacts on folks. We truly feel that it does. We truly feel that we listen to residents, but I understand some people don't translate that always in the work that we do. And sometimes that's because we can't do what residents want us to do because of some constraint or law that we have to comply with.
Right.
But really removing every ounce of mistrust or distrust that's in the community would be the ideal situation.
Great answer.
Do you think that a lot of this mistrust is trickling down from the way people view the federal government or state government, so they just assume that it's the same way with town government?
I really do.
Yeah.
I absolutely do. I think when you have leaders in any industry, some are more visible than others. Obviously, the federal government is probably most people's, even though it affects them probably the least, it's most people's kind of, if you say government, like what comes to, in your mind, it's probably more likely the White House than the town hall, regardless of where that town hall is. And when you're a leader and you're on TV every day and you make comments and statements, people see how you act. And again, it's different than what's going on here in Shrewsbury, because I think we treat people very respectfully and professionally, and I don't think that's happening in Washington. There's some things, maybe I shouldn't go there, but I will. There's some things in Washington, some outcomes that individuals are looking to achieve that I support. Like, I think government should be efficient and effective, and we should always look to improve and make things better. But it's very important how we go about doing that. And I do think when people see each other yelling at each other, calling, each other names, and that's acceptable, then it becomes acceptable when someone shows up at the town hall.
So it's interesting that this is where we've gone with the conversation, and I look back at my notes to say, how many times did I write something about that?
Yeah, and I've got that kind of as somewhat of a theme myself.
Yeah, because it really concerns me that when you're on a committee or a board and you've discussed something so many times in so many meetings, when someone says they didn't know about it, you think, how did you not know about it? But not everybody sits down to watch town government. But then you've taken it so much further with all of your different methods of trying to get the information out there and trying to communicate with the public. And you said that you have people on the select board that say, how can we do this better? How can we better communicate this? So everyone's thinking, how can we do it better? How can we better communicate? So you want to, whatever that is. So you're really saying you're open to suggestions. If someone has something that's missing, it's not that you don't want to communicate better. You give us an idea, give us the suggestion. So it's almost as if, as town meeting members and residents of the town, we should sometimes, instead of criticizing that you don't do it, tell you how you could possibly do it better.
Or do it in a different way,
A different method.
so that they can access it.
Yeah.
Because maybe part of the problem is access.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So did you want to add anything about communication?
Somewhat. So this year we have a contested select board race, which has gotten a lot of publicity. We're curious about underlying desire by some candidates for change. If you could step back without bias, what areas would you suggest might be the target for said change, and what thoughts do you have on how to bring about this change? I think we were just kind of talking about it.
Yeah.
And just so you know, the town manager doesn't even know who the guest is going to be when he walks in here. And we haven't discussed these questions. It's just probably on not just our minds, but some of your minds too.
Yeah, I'll start with an area that I think we've done a good job in changing recently, and I'll stick with communications. I think the volume of things that we communicate over the last 24 to 36 months has done two things. We've gotten a lot more volume. We communicate a lot more, and during that time, we've also changed how we communicate. So we have a print aspect of our communications. We have mostly a digital aspect of our communications through email and newsletters. And so I think we've done a lot. And some of the internal conversations we're having in the community or inside the office is, if we communicate more, will it be better? Right? Because sometimes, increasing the volume from, where we were to where we were before to where we are now was needed. I don't know that doubling or adding 10% or 15% more is actually going to make those people who are saying that I'm not hearing anything now get that information. If there's opportunities for us to do that, I would be willing to take it on. But so I think it's more how can we really resonate? How can we get our message across better? If print and email isn't working and the website isn't working, what are those other options that we have? So one of the things I've been trying to do personally, and I came to Shrewsbury Town Center Association as one of my first attempts at this, is me just being out there more. And I called it the Common Ground Roundtable hearings, so just being present more. And I'm holding office hours, which people are coming to, and we did budget office hours. So how we communicate, I think, is something that I would like to continue to change and evolve. I just wish, we could, through those communications, we could provide insight into how we make our decisions a little bit better. So that's what I'd really like to do. I'd love if you read your question again so I can think about it more.
You want me to reread it?
Yeah, if you could.
Okay. So we have a select
Sure.
board race that's contested. So I'm curious about the underlying desire by some candidates for change.
Mm-hmm.
If you could step back without bias, what areas would you suggest might be the target for said changes, like what they think might need to be changed? And what thoughts do you have on how to bring about the change?
Yeah. I think a couple things looking at Shrewsbury historically, like there's a couple areas that I still scratch my head about that we've put into place recently, well, at least since I've been here, that we didn't have historically. So there's some changes that I wish were brought about sooner, and that was creation of a human resources department and the creation of a professional planning department. Now I know we've done that, and but the reason I still think it's important to talk about them is because we're immature in those areas. And it's really, I see some of the especially when it comes to planning, because we have a relatively immature, like in the grand scheme of things, some municipalities have had planning departments for decades, right? And it's been, very deliberate in how they shape their zoning bylaws. And we've had zoning bylaws for decades, but we haven't had professional planners in place to really try to influence the outcomes of development and shape zoning. So things have happened kind of more organically and more at the desire of developers than the community itself. So I think that's something that we're still grappling with as we look at how, development has occurred and continues to occur in town. And what may have been able to be done sooner is we may have reached a 10% affordable housing level within the community if we were more deliberate about it, and we may not be subject to 40B in the current day. So, I think there's zero parts of the local government that we couldn't consider making changes within, and we always want to continue to evolve and make it better. But communications, and then some of those areas that we didn't introduce because we're maybe looking to save money, maybe they weren't the highest prioritized investments that were further behind the scenes. I think they impact us as an organization today.
You just said, do you have any more about communication?
No. Oh. Well, I may.
Okay.
It'll probably come back
all right.
up.
Okay. So you mentioned 40B and how could we have done a better job? Mm-hmm. It seems over the past many years, we've always tried to strive to be aware of 40B, try to put affordable units where we could and so forth. But as the formula for 40B mm-hmm. is that you have, as the population grows, that number increases. Mm-hmm. So you need more affordable units. So we've been like a hamster on a mm-hmm. treadmill on a wheel trying to, meet that 10%, but mm-hmm. we can't because it keeps changing with the population.
That's interesting.
So, mm-hmm. people need to know that there's been an awful lot of thought around making sure the affordable mm-hmm. units get in. Mm-hmm. So even if we got to the 10%, mm-hmm. next year, it could be different because the population has has grown. Now, when you then take it to, well, slow down the growth. Well, even that's a vicious cycle, because if people own land and it's a buildable lot, they have a right
Correct.
to do that. That's the law. That's not us saying don't or you can't. It's the law. If you own the land and it's a buildable lot, then they can build. If you have a business and part of that business you put in apartments, if those apartments meet the requirements, then you can't avoid putting in affordable units. You can't avoid building. You can control it to some degree, and that can be thoughtful. And maybe someone is an expert and has a better idea as to how to control that. But it's not that the effort hasn't been there to do all of those things.
No, but what I see and what I think we're trying to do right now is say, what is the path to get us to 10%, and not just say no and fight and resist every housing development that's coming to town, because 40B provides a unique opportunity while we're subject to it, is that if it's a rental unit, even if the individual unit isn't an affordable unit, it counts towards our inventory. So what the select board has done over the last 2 to 3 years is said, okay, how many units, what number of units do we need to get to 10%? We know once we're at 10%, we control our destiny completely through zoning. We don't subject commercial lots. So my thought on that was just, if we would have taken an approach that, our first answer wasn't no, and we're going to fight you every step of the way if you want to build housing, and how can we build enough housing proactively with affordable units to get to our 10% sooner. And that's what we've really been trying to work on. And the select board has gotten criticism for it, because it's like, oh, you're partnering with this development to allow, more apartments come into the community. And yes, it is, because we're trying to shape the outcome to get a project that we all feel meets some of those ideals that we talked about just a couple of minutes ago at the beginning of the show, while satisfying that 10% requirement, because we all know we can also just turn our back and they're going to build it any other way, and it may not be what we desire.
And someone, one of the candidates said something to the effect, we should just build a affordable unit development. And it's like, do you want a Great Brook Valley?
Right.
With no offense to Great Brook Valley. I mean, is that what you want? Because if you go through towns, you can actually visualize that they have that, and that isn't good for the people living there, and it's not good for the people living in the town. It's not good for either one of them. Right. You want those people to be a part of the town, not an isolated complex.
Correct.
Just for them.
Correct.
And say, oh, the people who need affordable units live there. You don't, nobody wants that. I hope not.
I have a question that's sort of related to this topic. May I go ahead
Sure.
and ask? There's a lot of talk in town about responsible growth and development. Right. So what do you see is the town manager's role in the overall process, and what can you do and what can't you do?
Sure. So what we can do is, I think, understand what areas of control that we have and how we can strategically work towards building more control. One of those things is in housing, right? Because right now, 40B just makes it really clear. If you don't have 10% affordable housing and someone wants to build housing, we don't care what your zoning says, right? That's what the state law says. Housing shall be developed if a developer wants to build there. So we could take every vacant parcel in town right now that could allow for residential development and change its zoning to commercial development. But that doesn't matter, because 40B comes in and says, if it's going to be residential, it doesn't matter what the underlying zoning is. So what I think we can do is get a way to get to our 10% threshold, and then we have the authority and control to prevent, more residential development if that's what the community wants. And that's the starting place. So what is it that the community wants, and what are those outcomes, and then what are the trade-offs? I think that's what my role is. So once we have everything that's under our control, and I do think we need to address 40B and make sure we can get more under our local control, is once we're beyond that, if residents and the community do not desire more residential growth, more commercial growth, or both, then we need to look at the tools that we have to shape that. The main one is zoning, and we can work on that and help the community meet those outcomes. But what it needs to be balanced by is what services do residents want. Because I think most folks know here in Massachusetts that our largest source of revenue is property taxes. And in order to provide services that have either an annual cost increase or new services that cost more than 2.5% every year, we need to find some other source of revenue. And when that source of revenue, is derived from the property tax, it means we need new property value to get more revenue to provide different services to residents. So my job as town manager to say is, okay, if we don't want development, if we don't want commercial or residential, what are our other options that exist out there to change or increase our revenues in another way to provide the services that you're also asking? And then if that's not desirable, then we have to say, well, then we're going to have to cut services. So, I truly feel that it's my job as town manager to explain those circumstances to residents and help residents through town meeting and otherwise make those decisions for the collective community, right? It's not my job, and I certainly don't say I want more Kevin Mizikar wants more residential development or more commercial development, right? What I want to do is to be able to provide the services and outcomes that residents expect. Historically in Shrewsbury, that's been like unparalleled, unrivaled education, right? And that takes money, right? And every other aspect of our operations, no one wants mediocre services either. Everyone wants their street plowed. Everyone wants no potholes in the road. Everyone wants to feel protected from public safety, whether that's from emergency hazards that relate to the fire department or the police department. Well, those all cost money, right? So one of the reasons that development and new things are so important to us right now is because it provides the revenue to provide the services. It's not the development in and of itself.
And the discussion for as long as I've been around has always been increase the tax revenue to make it easier on the residents, so that we get the services we want, we maintain the services that we're accustomed to, but it doesn't affect the residential tax dollar. So bring in the businesses in the commercial development that's going to bring in that revenue, which has been happening.
We finally, yeah.
Which has been happening. So once we do that, you have people saying, why do you keep bringing in warehouses, or why do you we're bringing in tax dollars to protect the residential tax dollar.
Yeah. And we happen to be in a commercial development era or time, maybe it's not an era, but at least a point in time where that is what is happening in central Massachusetts where we are, right? And we are subject, we're subject to the overall marketplace and what people are willing to invest in. But I think we've done a really good job, even though we've built buildings that look like warehouses. When we filled that, or whenever they've been filled with commercial tenants, they've been very high-end manufacturing companies versus logistics companies.
Clean manufacturing.
Yeah, and I think it's because of the work that the staff and the team does. And maybe people won't like when I say this, but building relationships with developers. If I can build a relationship with a developer and say to them, really, and I say this to the folks that are building in town, like, we don't want, necessarily, final mile delivery company, right? Like, we don't want an Amazon warehouse. That's not what we desire. We want, higher end clean manufacturing jobs that are going to be in this community forever and not subject to the retail economy and all those things. And when you build relationships with those developers, they work with you, right? And I've seen them pass up Amazon when they knocked on the door once, the first wall went up, and are willing to sell a lease, and we say, man, can't we just wait? We've got to find something else. We're working with this company over here. Can we maybe have them look at your space? And we have gotten those really good outcomes. Centec North, we need to write a story about Centec North, because originally it was proposed for residential development. The town has held it for so long. We finally found the right development partner. That development partner built modern facilities, flexible space, and we're filling it with high-end commercial users. One of the biggest is Repligen, which is in the biomanufacturing industry, and is bringing high-paying jobs and clean manufacturing to Shrewsbury.
I think people aren't really understanding that it's not just the property that's getting taxed, it's what is inside
Absolutely.
the buildings that is also being taxed. And you don't get that when you have residential.
Correct. That is true. There's a double benefit to the commercial property tax, because there's a personal property tax that's associated with all the goods and equipment. So really easy example to that for folks that are listening is, in your home, we don't come in and be like, oh, you have a nice new dryer, that's $500. We're going to tax you on that. But if that was a commercial dryer in, a manufacturing facility, we do tax that, and then think of those really high-tech companies that we are attracting to the community, like Physique Instrumente and Repligen and Wuji Biologics. Their equipment's really expensive, and we get we get to tax that.
And UPS is now closing facilities and laying off thousands of workers. How is that impacting the UPS project in town?
So far, we haven't heard that it will, but when I read that headline, probably like anyone else that I said, oh no. I will just share, and this is a gut no conversations. Like, what I worry about is the facility on 140, and once the new facility at Centec Boulevard comes to fruition, will both still be sustainable, or does something unfortunate happen with that facility on 140? Now, the good news is they're two completely different type of operations. The 140 facility is the brown trucks that come to your home, and the one on Centec is tractor trailer to tractor trailer, and it doesn't have the brown trucks at it. So hopefully they both can stay, but without any conversations or thoughts, like that's my concern, is will the 140 facility remain open once the new one, or will they find a way to merge those two into one entity?
Do you have an annual report of any sort that shows this is the economic development in the past year, and this is the tax dollars it's bringing us?
We do. Yeah. Well, we probably don't have it in a report, but we should get it into one.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, I think, because we can say, look, this didn't affect my tax dollar. And the budget this year, with all of the acrobatics that you did, when you set the budget, it's $4 million lower than last year's budget.
Yeah, it got a little bit closer, but it's still less overall spending year over year than it was in the prior year.
What was the success of bringing, even though our value of our homes went up, which we don't really control that other than having a great town, the budget technically went down, even though we don't really, our taxes could have been higher, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, they could have been, and we are benefiting from that growth. So our tax rate, for all intents and purposes, is like $12 on a thousand value. Right. So if you look at it the other way, for every $100 million in value that comes to the community, we get $1.2 million in tax revenue. And our new growth this past year was over $1.5 million. So that means there's, compared to the prior June 30th, we have over $100 million in new value. And when you look at that, more than 50% of that new value is in the commercial property taxes. So that is where we are generating new revenue without impacting existing residents. Because if
that's the headline.
Yeah.
Says the former reporter.
I was just going to say, says the reporter.
And so if I go back to those other points of comparisons that I said, if we don't want development, then how do we get the revenue? That's where the questions really become. Right. So, like, as services continue to be more expensive and they're needed more, if we're not getting new revenue coming in, then we need more revenue from the existing tax base that we have, right? In Massachusetts, that's normally an override or something like that, or because we have very limited opportunity in comparison to some municipalities. Some municipalities can go, well, we want more revenue. We're going to increase the sales tax from 7 to 7.5%. So if you're in the Midwest or, the Southwest, municipalities have that own authority. They can change those different types of taxes, but we just don't have that level of authority as a local government in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
I have a sort of related question. How much funding does the town, including schools, annually receive in federal funding? And what is being done to consider how the municipal budget might be impacted by a change at the federal level?
Yeah. So the good news is we don't receive a lot of direct federal funding, less than, well, the vast majority of it is in the schools. So direct from Washington to Shrewsbury, it's a little over $1 million, and nearly all of that, over 90% of that's within the schools. We get a couple small grants in the public safety realm from the Department of Justice for justice, like bulletproof vests and things like that, but pennies on the dollar. But considering that we spend about $190 million a year, even $1 million isn't that significant. But it would be very painful if they did rescind that educational funding, because it goes to really important programming in the schools. What I'm most concerned about is if there's major programmatic changes in Washington to things like Medicare, because the states get a ton of money from the federal government to cover Medicare costs. And if that faucet gets turned off, knowing Massachusetts politics and care for its residents, they're going to want to continue to provide those services. What money does the state use to backfill the Medicare funding, and how does that impact municipalities? Because the state Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll has said time and time again in public and in meetings that I've been in, we don't have enough money to backfill the amount of money that we get from the federal government. It would be catastrophic if all federal funds went away. But if you take one of those major programs like Medicare and you turn the spigot off even halfway, the state's going to have to say, okay, we can't give the same amount of money to everyone else that we normally do. We've got to backfill this Medicare funding. And I would worry that would mean that they'd provide less state aid to municipalities, which we receive about $26 million each year. It's our second largest revenue source. So directly, I think we're fine. Indirectly through the state, I do have concerns in future years, but not this coming year.
So then this recent announcement that we're no longer in a relationship with other nearby communities for our public health, the dissolution of that relationship, how's that going to impact us?
So no federal ties involved in that right now. But if you look at public health together, I think it'll be a benefit to us. I think the simplest way to describe why we want to make that change is because the public health challenges in a very urban environment like the city of Worcester is different than it is in Shrewsbury and Grafton and Westboro or West Boylston. Even though we're really close to each other geographically, Worcester's an urban area and deals with a significant amount of challenges that we just don't see in the communities. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean there aren't homeless people in Shrewsbury and there's not substance abuse issues in Shrewsbury, but those issues don't have the same level of magnification and volume in the surrounding communities than we do at the city. And, from my perspective recently with the city, they've had to dedicate more time and resources from the start of COVID and continuing after COVID into themselves. And I felt that, it has started to impact the services that we've received from them. And I don't want to degrade any service in Shrewsbury, and public health is critically important. So the state has come up with a couple new grant funding opportunities. And so the city's going to pursue one grant funding opportunity and be on their own. And then the other municipalities will pursue a different grant funding opportunity. We've been assured that we'll get the grant, so we're not taking a risk there. But it's really about making sure that the right services are being provided to our residents in the three towns. and enabling the city to provide better services themselves.
So back up, tell the public the basis for what you're talking about.
So Shrewsbury really, I think for over 15 years, has shared services for public health with the city of Worcester and other municipalities in the area. So rather than Shrewsbury and Grafton and West Boylston and Worcester all having our own public health director, we share one public health director. And then we get, an economy of scale there. And, so there's a number of critical public health positions, like a public health nurse, an epidemiologist, and environmental type things like food licenses and tobacco inspections, that those processes are repeatable across cities and towns. So we combine our services together to save some money, and also be able to get better people in those roles, because we can pay a little bit more money incrementally and provide better services to residents. So the change will be the city's going to do that on their own. The city has 205,000 residents, and then the rest of the communities, Grafton 20,000 residents, Shrewsbury 40,000, West Boylston about 8. We're going to take those 68,000 residents and provide through a shared arrangement.
So those three, it is still a shared,
Yes,
between the communities,
the other 3.
except Worcester.
That is
Okay.
correct.
So you're severing with Worcester.
Yeah.
Okay, so who will be, for example, the public health epidemiologist?
Yeah.
Who will that be?
So we don't know the person yet, but we know that Shrewsbury will be the lead entity, and the employees who service the regional alliance will be Shrewsbury employees, for which will receive money from West Boylston and Grafton to cover those costs, and that other state grant, the state public health excellence grant.
Who's going to manage all of this?
It'll come in through Shrewsbury. So
what I would beg
Yep.
is that as this takes place, which is fine, that the people that go in those positions are doctor, nurse, people with the public health background. And the reason I say that is because I think when we went to this consortium, we didn't have that. So I wouldn't want us to go backwards. And I would want to be sure that if we're going to have a public health department, that it's truly what,
agreed.
because we didn't have that.
I definitely agree. So I would see right now at minimum, our public health director would have a master's degree in public health, maybe more. We'll certainly have certified public health nurses, however many we need. We'll have registered sanitarians at the inspectional services level. So we'll still leverage that economy of working with other cities and towns, but it just won't be with the city of Worcester.
So that's another reason why we really need to pass this upcoming debt exclusion for the town hall and the DPW.
Yeah, it will provide us with additional opportunity for space within the town hall to be able to accommodate new employees. It will be important. That is correct.
Now, what would the input from the public health commissioners in town?
Yeah.
They'll be part of that?
Yeah, think of it as 2 separate buckets. The things that we've been talking about right now are the staff, and they are, they execute and they recommend, and then the Board of Health sets policy. So the Board of Health has always done that. Grafton's Board of Health will continue to provide policy for Grafton, Shrewsbury's for Shrewsbury, West Boylston, and that has always, even when we were 14 different cities and towns in the region. So our public health will continue to provide policy and recommendations for Shrewsbury specifically.
Do you have any specific towns that you will model after?
Good question.
Well, I mean, honestly, as weird as it is, because we're dissolving, the Central Mass Regional Public Health Alliance has been the model public health group in the state. So we'll continue to do what we have been doing. But there's been a lot of success in the boroughs. So Westboro, Southboro, and Northboro recently started a new public health relationship that won an award at the MMA last year. And we'll work towards those standards and models.
Good. How just budget-wise, how many new employees are in your FY26 budget?
One.
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 I
Yes.
think this is important also for public communication and public perception, because it's, as you've reorganized town departments, the perception is that means you've hired a lot of people, but you really haven't. And when you think of from one year to the next, you've only added one into your budget. That's pretty low.
Right. Yeah. So someone will say, well, didn't you just say you're adding more Shrewsbury employees for public health? Yes, but that's already funded, right? Like, so right now,
Right.
we send $190,000 a year to Worcester for public health. We'll retain that funding. And Grafton sent it, I forget their numbers. Let's just call it $100,000, and West Boylston spent about $30,000. So West Boylston will send us theirs, Grafton will send us theirs, and we'll manage it here.
There you go.
Yeah. So
That
So
makes
you're
sense.
the juggler. We should give you a nickname.
Yeah.
You're the juggler, because as you rearrange,
yeah.
you're not stretching the pot. You're just reorganizing
Correct. Right.
in a good way. I think so. One employee, and any changes to structure other than the public health?
So we do have we have promoted Christina Ordung to assistant town manager for human capital. So that's not an increase in anything besides.
Start with who she is.
So Christina Ordung is the human resources director. She was our first human resources dedicated professional about 7 years ago at this point.
Already.
And so she's continued to evolve. There's 3 people within her department, including her right now. That one additional position is another position within her department, and she's being promoted. She's done an amazing job, and I don't want to sound like I'm underselling what she's going to do. She'll have a bigger role in the organization, but the title will make her have a greater influence over the operations of all departments. We want to be a human-centered organization, both the humans that we service and the humans that we service with and provide services to residents. So Christina's playing a critical role in the development of this new regional public health model. We are strongly reevaluating, as everyone knows, how we run dispatching operations. We're looking to get into the ambulance business.
Because look at the cost. If you look at what we originally paid for that ambulance service, which really raised the bar as far as the care people get when they come into your home in an emergency. If you look at what we originally paid, and the reason why we didn't have to pay more was because they were collecting it through insurances, et cetera. And then you look at what we're paying now, that's gone crazy. I mean, that cost has gone skyrocketed. And I was never satisfied with that, but we didn't want to compromise the service.
Right.
So if you can provide the same service or better,
Yeah. We think we can, yeah.
Within the cost that we're paying now.
Yeah, so
Right.
yeah, I mean basically the ambulance as we see it will be self-supporting, right? So we'll engage with a business entity, they'll do the collections from insurance companies and things like that, and it'll be self-sufficient.
subcontract, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll raise, not in the first year, we're going to have to seed some money into it, but once we get it up and running, even year 2, we'll raise enough money to cover the personnel and capital costs.
Because billing will be a big part of that. The billing
Yes,
work.
the billing, that'll be the main subcontracted role.
Yeah. And then there's another one that, what's another department, as you were talking, I was thinking, community services, and I don't mean this to slight Shrewsbury Community Services. We started out giving them $4,000 a year, and what are we up to this year for FY26?
350.
Youth and
Yeah,
family
Shrewsbury
Yes.
Youth and Family Services. Yeah, 350.
Okay, so and we give all that money, which I'm not saying it's not needed, but we don't control it. We don't have impact and say on what's happening within that. But we give them a lot of money. They fundraise a lot of money. They do a lot of work raising money, but that's a big chunk of money to not have direct control and input as to how that is run.
Yeah, so and that's
What's that? Next step?
that's true. So we don't have a board member.
Right.
We have a contract with SYSF, and we have dedicated staff that work for SYSF that we fund.
And they do good work, so don't misunderstand what
yeah.
I'm saying.
No. And so we that contribution is about a third of the overall budget of SYSF. And look, I understand and get it. Like there's an opportunity I think we need to explore to see if there should be some direct town member on the staff. But if you intermix the word, capital T or little t, whichever one you want to apply to the local government versus the residents, there's mostly all residents serve as board members.
Right, and good residents doing good work.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel the stewardship of those funds, right? We need to explore
But I do
it's
think
good.
you should have some direct line
Understood. Yeah.
as an employee because of the amount of money. It's phenomenal now.
And not direct formally, but great relationship with the executive director
Right.
and regular meetings.
And they're
every month
valued.
and
I
all
mean,
that stuff.
if you ask people in the school department, that alone is a valuable organization to them. So they provide an awful lot to the people of Shrewsbury.
Yes, they do.
That's not even my question. I just believe that there should be some sort of pipeline.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I could go off on that.
There is an event tonight, actually. They're having a Derby style, Kentucky Derby themed
Oh, nice.
fundraising event tonight that I'll be going to.
You gonna wear a hat?
I have a fascinator. Yes, I do.
That's great. If you were to talk about your budget for FY26, what would you say are the key points that you would want the public to know about?
First and foremost, just level services that the services that we're providing this year will be continued into the next year. And one of the reasons I think that's important to say is because that's not happening in a lot of cities and towns. A lot of cities and towns are asking for overrides and they're not getting passed, and they are having to reduce staffing levels and reduce services. So we will continue to provide the same services, and we're giving ourselves, we're requesting $250,000 from town meeting to refine internal business processes to see if we can further reduce operating costs. And that may not mean that we reduce the number of staff that we have, but how can we dedicate people who maybe 75% of their time goes to an internal business function like accounts payable or payroll? How could we use technology to automate those processes and allow them to provide better direct to resident services, something more meaningful than they're doing? So we're working on that. So level services and taking a look at internal operations for efficiency and effectiveness.
With all the uncertainty that's before us as a country, and everyone on the news, no matter what news station they're talking about, are we going into a recession? What's going to happen? Looking forward, should we, over the next couple of years, have more fiscal restraint, more fiscal conservatism to protect what we have so that we don't find ourselves laying people off or cutting services? Is that something that you and your group will be looking at over the next 6 months as you plan for the following budget?
Yes.
I know you are.
Yeah.
But the public needs to know.
When I think about it, there's a couple areas of our revenue that are very susceptible to the general economic conditions, and they all fall within our third largest revenue category, which is local receipts. And so the biggest subcategory of that is like motor vehicle excise tax. And people have been buying a lot of new cars, and cars are more expensive, so our revenues have been up in that area. And then a couple of questions actually came up at the recent special town meeting on the facilities optimization project about interest, and shouldn't we be investing our dollars? It's not something that we talk about a lot, but we do invest our money already. And right now, because of the bond market being very strong, we actually have been earning about 3% interest, and that's not very high for the general stock market, but we don't take that type of risk because we can't lose money. So that has meant that we've been earning about $2.5 million in interest every year. And that 3% interest needs compared to about 0.25% interest that we were earning, maybe 5 years ago. So if there's big changes in the economy, there are impacts, and even like $1 million or $2 million revenue change would be really significant for us. It would really impact it. The other thing that gives me a little bit of comfort is that our local receipts as a category, we're still really conservative in how we budget for that. So the market could correct itself some and it wouldn't eat into us directly, but we're getting closer. So I am worried about that. The other point that I think I just want to make is that we've spent so much time over the last 5 to 8 years building our reserves. So we now have a general stabilization account that has about $7 million in it. Whenever I started, there was $600,000 in it. So we can rely upon that $7 million if we have a year or two that's down. It's a stabilization account. It's supposed to stabilize our operations. So we could draw upon that. We have the override stabilization account that is for ongoing operations, but there's about $9 million in there. So I think and free cash has about $8 million in it still. So we have good reserves, about $26 million in total, that we can weather some pretty choppy storms, but we don't want to get greedy or aggressive. It's better to not have to touch those funds.
Another comment through the debate, I thought I heard a theme of the way we're spending. You plan and you have your departments get in line, basically. So this year, this department may be getting a little extra attention, but the others are waiting for their turn. And so they basically get in line. You do the same thing with building projects. And I think right now we feel a little, boggled, I guess, that we're talking about, what the very needed DPW as voted by town meeting. That project's going to be voted on soon, next week. We're talking about the high school that's been overcrowded, really needs work, and that Selco would be moving to North Quinsigamon Ave, but there's financial implications there, but that money wouldn't come out of our tax dollar. That's already taken care of through Selco. So there's projects, and because you talk about them publicly so frequently, people may forget that there's a line. So it's not going to happen before the appropriate time. It's going to happen in a sequence as it's been for years and years and years. So even though you're so transparent about it, you're still using that sequence.
And the high school is sort of dependent on the MSBA.
Right.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
That changes every couple of years.
And so, that's several years down the road, or a few years down the road. So
I had a meeting talked to the senior men's group this morning, and one of the things that I shared to them is that by the time, if the high school project moves forward, and I said, I've only been here for 8 years, but I call it the new high school as well. But if the new high school moves forward on its current path, the renovations would be completed around 2030. I hate to tell everyone that building will be open for 30 years at that point.
By that time.
So we're making an investment in a 30-year facility.
Right.
It's not like, hey, we just opened it yesterday. Let's do something different with it. And to the overall spending part of it, I do think that sometimes we're a victim of talking about the things like where we started our conversation. But I think the key point is, so we've set expenditure side limitations once we passed the last override in 2021, and we've capped the amount of money that the municipal and schools can spend in a year. And the absolute proof that we've been doing that is the $9 million that's in the override stabilization account. Because if we wouldn't have had expenditure caps, that $9 million represents money that we've raised in prior years that we haven't spent. If we wouldn't have had the expenditure caps, and we can have further conversations whether they're the right caps or not, But the caps that we have in place allowed us to save $9 million that we would have otherwise spent in the last 5 fiscal cycles and use them in the future. Most municipalities, and they're still passing overrides today, because I ask every time I hear about one, they're passing an override without a long-term plan associated with it. And that either means they're going to need to ask for an override next year because they really needed all that money, or they're going to spend more on the next year and have to get to an override sooner. We didn't do that. We said, if you give us this amount of money, we're going to spread that as far as we can, and how we're doing that is the override stabilization account. So that's $9 million that we would have been allowed to spend otherwise, that we've limited ourselves from spending so we could do better things in the future.
Do you have anything you want to add? Because we only have a couple minutes.
Couple minutes. Okay, I do have one. Could you touch a little bit about the town center developments that possibly are going, like the dry cleaners in Beale?
Yeah. So we're very happy that we're beyond the litigation with Beale, and the judge has found that the town and the developer have done everything that needed to do, and he dismissed the case that was against the town. And so that's good news. That affirms our zoning process, that affirms the planning board process, and the residents were found to not have standing, that there's no substantial harm to them. So I've been talking to the developer, and they're kind of on the clock again, and they have like a 60-day window to get financing, and then we have to close by early fall. So they're moving in that direction, which is really good news. The dry cleaner, unfortunately, it should be a case study once it's all done of just terrible circumstances. We've had it at land court now for 3 years, and we're waiting for the judge to give us a certificate to foreclose. It's now being held up because the state changed its tax title rules, and there's the challenge against how much interest we are allowed to charge and when we're allowed to charge it. We don't have enough time to get into it, but so that one's unfortunately still delayed, and we don't have a certificate to foreclose upon it yet. But we'll move as soon as we can on that, and hopefully we get an outcome from the courts within the next few months.
And I just want to say once again, this hour has flown by.
Wow.
I didn't get to half my questions.
Yeah.
You may have to come back later.
I would love that. This was so
great.
much fun.
It is. And
I learned so much.
and I hope you've learned a lot, because this was certainly not the plan, and it was great from my perspective.
Oh, mine too.
Yeah.
And
I was
so-
honored that I was asked.
See that? And do you want anything?
No.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
So-
I enjoyed this a
and-
lot.
and-
Very, very hard questions, deep ones.
And then the one other thing is I found fascinating about the candidates. All 5 candidates for select board support the DPW project and would vote yes on that, which I found interesting that everybody had the same thing to say. And with that, I hope you enjoyed today, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time, and we've got to get her back.